With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, let's go back overseas. Let's continue to talk about this energy crisis because it is worldwide, global, and Germany's right in the center of it for a whole lot of reasons. We're going to talk to Felix Hosse about right now. He joins us from Berlin. Felix, thank you so much for the time, my friend. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thrilled to have you. Always enjoy hearing that German accent from having lived over there. I miss the place. Y'all got some drama on the energy front. Let's start big picture because we've talked about we're going to talk about nuclear. We've talked about the gas exports. We know about Russia and Ukraine and Putin putting the screws to Germany and the rest of the EU. We know all that. Let's back up, though, because part of the puzzle that the Western media and Western audience may not know is, one of our founding principles on our program is things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a sequence. So a lot of folks on the outside are going, why did Germany let themselves get in this position with drawing down their nuclear power, with making themselves so dependent on Russian gas and other energy sources? Give us that piece of it, the background of this that folks may not know that led up to the current crisis as far as Germany and the EU is concerned.
Well, we have to go back very far in time, actually, until the 1970s and 80s to explain why Germany quit using nuclear power. Back in those days, there was a large anti-nuclear movement, which was mainly fueled by fear and under the pressure of the Cold War. So they basically equated the civil use of nuclear power with nuclear bombs. And after seeing the damage that nuclear bombs can do, they basically were afraid. And the problem with that movement was that it's very influential. In the 1970s, they had a lot of decentralized groups, which were organizing their resistance towards the multiple nuclear power plants within Germany. And in 1980, our Green Party was founded, which was basically just those groups coming together. So right now we have a party which is in parliament and very, very influential in German culture, which has as their founding story as this myth that they base all their policy on, that they are anti-nuclear. And I alluded to that they're very influential in politics, in parliament, but also in media, mainly in the public broadcasting, which we have right now, and almost in any facet of society.
Now, you mentioned the Green Party, for lack of a better terminology. We've seen the Green parties in other countries in Europe start to kind of turn around on this a little bit. Belgium's in particular, the Holland, the Netherlands, the Green Party there, they're starting to kind of move away from that a little bit and go, okay, we want to be environmentally friendly. Maybe we can work this out with the nuclear folks a little bit. We're seeing some changes in some other places. Are we seeing that with the Green Party in Germany, though?
We do not. I think there was 1 week where they contemplated, when they were basically in panic, thinking about, all right, we are in an energy crunch right now. Are we going to abandon our principle of being anti-nuclear? And that discussion was pretty short-lived in the party itself, because they came together and said, we're the Greens, we cannot let that happen. This is we would abandon a large share of our core voter base. So we cannot let that happen.
Now, the Western perception of Germany, of course, longtime allies of America, friends of America, the perception is everybody thinks of the German people as being practical. Of course, the manufacturing base, very industrial, very forward thinking and how to get things done. That's sort of a stereotype of the German people. Why is it nuclear is such a bugaboo to the folks, especially the Green Party folks? You mentioned it a little bit, the thing from the 70s, but we're 2 generations from that. Is it just repeated so much that people believe it? Or is it just ingrained in folks? Or is there something in this new wave of these new Green Party? I'm talking to people like 20 to 40, the newer generation of them. Is it just habit, or is it something else going on that we're not really aware of?
I would say On one hand, it's habit. On one hand, it's definitely habit. Over those years when we just for context, we phased out our nuclear. We made the decision to phase out our nuclear plants in 2011. So up until this point, nuclear power was running very smoothly, and nobody really worried about it. We did that under the impression of Fukushima, but under the surface, the anti-nuclear and the nuclear skepticism had been growing since the 70s and 80s. And you said that Germany is always seen as this very efficient, non-emotional approach to doing business and doing industry and producing. However, there's a slight caveat to that. I think that after the Second World War, we never really had any drastic disruptive innovation coming up. Basically, also not even like going back even earlier than that. So the industriousness that Germany is known for is a thing of the past, and right now we're basically having this dreamer-like attitude that we are still a rich country, that we are basically just feeding off of the innovation that we did roughly 100 years ago. And when you're in a country which does not realize why it is rich, then you end up with policies which basically go against what made us rich. For example, cheap energy, and that nuclear comes with that.
This is interesting, though, because maybe this is one of those things where we talk about maybe the culture is dictating the politics more than the other way around. We're going to talk about the policy side of this and what you wrote about in just a minute, but talk about the generational change, because I think you're hitting on something important here, because you talked about disruption. Well, the last real big disruption in Germany before this current crisis was reunification, which was a massive economic change. They had to absorb the Eastern Germans. That was the same time the U.S. did massive drawdowns, which changed their economic situation. That was a big period of change in Germany. But we're over a generation away from that now. So this new generation is probably not really thinking of those things. They really haven't had a major economic disruption. The EU's ran pretty smoothly until this Putin invading Ukraine thing. They really kind of had a bit of a bubble of good times and good economy and things going well. Is that part of the problem here, is that culturally, this is kind of the first crisis for the current generation of a whole lot of Germans and a lot of the EU in general?
I always say that Germany is too rich. Germany is too rich to appreciate freedom and prosperity and innovation. Right now, we are basically living off the fruits of our previous decades and even centuries. We have had high energy prices. But we've been rich enough to basically not notice them. Obviously, the lower classes in our society have been struggling under the highest energy prices which are in the world right now. But the middle classes and the upper middle classes, who are overly represented in media and in culture, have not felt the pain. And now this has changed, right? This has changed since the invasion of Ukraine. And since the Russian gas is likely to be not flowing next winter.
Yeah, and this is the core of this problem: is winter's coming, and there's nothing
Yes.
you're going to do to stop winter from coming. Are people cognizant of that? Is there a sense of urgency to do something about any of this? Now, we've seen a little bit of movement on the nuclear front. They've talked about not shutting down what they haven't shut down yet, that sort of thing. But really, you talked about this. We're dealing with policy that was set in 2011. So, almost 10, 11, 12 years ago now. Is there really that much they can do at this late hour to slam the brakes on this thing?
So there is a sense of urgency within the population. The amount of firewood that has been stolen from the forests is going up. The prices of I would say, like, the prices of gas, the prices of oil is going up because people are afraid that they cannot heat their homes in the winter. So within the population, there is a strong sense of urgency, and this is usually this is not reflected in the urgency of, for example, that the Greens feel right now. Some other parties which are in the governing coalition, like the SPD and the FDP, um, they kind of voice a sense of urgency there, but they are in a coalition with the Greens together. So I guess they would be more vocal if they weren't in the coalition.
Yeah, and for the American audience and the international audience that aren't familiar with parliamentarian politics, Olaf Scholz's ruling coalition, they call it the traffic signal coalition, green, yellow, red. Just kind of break that down for a second, because that's the current ruling party. It's a brand new ruling party after a long tenure of Angela Merkel. Say whatever you want, but it was stable for a long, long time. This is a lot of new on top of everything else, and that's part of this story as well, isn't it?
Yes, for sure, for sure. It's a very novel way of doing politics in Germany. It's first and foremost, it's a three-party coalition, which is new on the federal level. We do have the majority within that coalition is the SPD, which is the Social Democrats. Those have been usually they have been actually running on the ticket that nothing really changed. For some reason, they managed to be associated with the continuity that was actually appreciated under the Merkel government. So Olaf Scholz was a part of that too for a long time, and he managed to just have this sense of continuity, and this is why he became the chancellor. The other parties in there are the Greens and the classical liberal, like the Liberal Democrats. Coming to the Greens, they are new to government. They had been in government when Gerhard Schröder, or the chancellor before Merkel was in power, and they were polling very well before the election, and there were even some rumors that they could actually that the chancellor could be from the Green Party. That didn't materialize because Scholz had a pretty good last couple of weeks before the election, but the Greens have never been this strong and influential in German politics, and those parties are, I would say, could be considered left wing. And then you have the odd party in that coalition, which are the classical liberals, the Free Democrats, and those represent more of a centrist centrist politics. They have the classical liberal values. However, they find it very, very tough against those two left parties to actually make a mark on policy. This is the current situation which we're having.
Yeah. We're talking to our friend Felix Hosse. We're going to continue to talk about the German politics. We're going to talk about Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the Scholz machine. We're going to get into why he's called that and the policy. Also get back to his piece he wrote. We're going to get into some of the numbers, nuclear by the numbers. Why was it a public panic that put this whole thing together? What they're going to do about it. Talking more about nuclear energy with our friend over in Germany. Herd Tell continues right after this. Welcome back to Herd Tell. Felix Hosse joining us from over in Berlin, talking a little energy, talking some nuclear. We're talking about policy and politics and culture all colliding when it comes to nuclear. Anytime you have those three together, you need to go to leadership. The current leadership and Chancellor of Germany is Olaf Scholz. We talked about his party, but let's talk about the man for a minute. Again, he's good, bad, or indifferent, whatever you thought of Angela Merkel. She's been there a long time. They had a lot of stability. They had a lot of economic success. She was a major player on the world stage, especially when it came to Russia and her evolution about Russia over the years. He's an unknown quality to a lot of people. We've got some book on him now. He's been in power for a couple of months. What are people thinking about Olaf Scholz when it comes to this energy crisis?
In terms of style, he basically continues the style of Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel has been successful in ruling Germany, or had been successful in ruling Germany for such a long time, by having a style which basically focuses on not rocking the boat, not doing any major reforms which would be needed, and basically governing based on polls. So try to do not what is necessary, but what is right now in this moment politically which the opportunity is there and which people appreciate in this particular moment. So Olaf Scholz has the same style. However, he does not have there is no emotional connection like we had with Merkel. He's a very bland character, and he doesn't get the emotion that we had to Mutti Merkel, which means mother Merkel, which some Germans called her. So that's his government style. He does not rock the boat, and this particular style gets very interesting if you're in a coalition with two other parties, because then you do not exactly pick sides when some coalition parties have their pet projects, their topics. For example, the Greens having the topic of nuclear power. There he doesn't pick any sides, and he just lets them run with it. This is the current situation of leadership in regards to nuclear.
Now, you've got people, like you mentioned and alluded to before, some of these other parties, this is a coalition government, they're openly talking about if this winter gets ugly, the crisis gets worse, he's going to have problems with his coalition. What's he saying? What's he pitching the German people right now? Because they're looking at the calendar. We're deep into August here. It's getting cold up there. You know, those cold, rainy German winters are no joke. I've been through them. What's he telling the people? What's the pitch to the people who are concerned about this issue right now?
The interesting fact is that Scholz doesn't pitch anything. Scholz basically lets the ministers govern, which is the Minister of Economy, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Ecology. For those, he just lets them fight it out amongst themselves. The interesting thing is that the Minister of Finance is from the Free Democrats, so the classical liberal party, and the Minister of Economy is of the Green Party. So there is a conflict which he basically just removes himself from and lets them fight it out.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like leadership to me, but what do I know? Maybe he knows something about it. I don't know. The other piece of this is always renewable energy. It ain't from lack of trying. Germany has spent enormous funds, enormous infrastructure, and they've been doing it for a long time. They were early adapters on it. I'm looking at the background on my computer screen right now is a picture from 2008 that we took because we would drive up on the hills above where we lived in Schonenberg-Kubelberg, and it's just windmills as far as you can see on top of the hill. It's one of my favorite pictures. My daughter took it. That's the background on my computer I'm looking at now. That was a long time ago. They've been doing renewable energy for a long time. Has Germany got the investment back from that they thought they would get?
About renewable energy, we have been doing large investments in solar and wind, and it's not for a lack of trying. Our basic enemy in German energy policy is basic physics. The problem with wind and solar is that there are times when the wind is not blowing and the sun's not shining, and when the wind blows and the sun shines, we have the energy from those sources. In the times when when we do not have the energy, we have to rely on other sources. So actually, with we started off with the intention of becoming more green and more nuclear, but for example, our carbon emissions are much higher than the surrounding countries because, quite frankly, we do not have as much nuclear in our energy mix. So we were for a long time living the dream in energy policy, and we woke up roughly half a year ago.
Yeah, abruptly. Thank you, Vladimir Putin. I seem like I ask this question every time we talk about nuclear on the program with every guest on nuclear. I'm going to phrase it this way because you wrote about it in your piece. You talked about the Green Party's opposition. You wrote that it is largely white collar opposition characterized by a lack of understanding of the energy demands of private enterprise and how increased energy prices affect working class people. Also, all this high tech stuff that Germany's trying to get in on, trying to be the leading edge on in Europe, massive outlaws of power to do things like that. Even in things like there was news today about the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, how it's just massive power drains to do these sorts of things. Germany's going to need power if it's going to remain the economic engine of not just Germany, the entire EU relies on Germany. That's just the facts of it. How in the world are we going to have a conversation with those white collar folks in the Green Party, like you talked about, to breach the gap of like, hey, we have data. This nuclear energy is clean. If you care about the environment, nuclear energy is the best option to get the most power possible for the cleanest energy possible. But there just seems to be this force field around it where they don't want to hear it, or we're not communicating it well enough, those of us that advocate for it. So this is the question I always ask every time we talk about energy. How do we change that? How do we get that conversation changed so that one side or the other starts meeting in the middle a little bit here?
I think we have to start off by realizing that this white collar, the group of white collar people, this so-called intelligentsia, and mostly of civil servants who are very supportive of the Greens, are in a minority. So what we first and foremost need is the majority to stand up and say, we do not let you dictate our energy policy. That's the first thing that should happen. The second thing is that they should get into a position where even they realize that energy is too expensive. And this will come in next winter. I guarantee you. The price increases are already very drastic and they're expected to be astronomical. So this is what needs to happen. And quite frankly, we need a lot of change coming from society. We need to point the finger exactly at who's responsible for this, which is the green mainstream currently. And this is the only way, by raising the societal pressure, on how we can get out of this.
Yeah. Here's the tough question, and this is going to be some prognostication, so just do your best with it. But if this thing gets ugly, if Putin really does turn off all the gas like he's probably going to threaten to do because he's going to want concessions and he's going to want to put the pressure on Ukraine. If this gets really ugly, when people get hurt and people get scared, they're not always rational. The German people, we know the policy, we know where the government stands, we know where the EU stands, we know where America and the Allies stand. The German people, if they start really feeling the bite of this thing, what direction is that anger and frustration going to get aimed at? Is it going to be at Scholz? Is it going to be at Putin? Where's this going to land at?
We're right now facing a problem that we're currently facing the consequences of the sanctions towards Russia, which I think are right. We should have those sanctions, but the German public is already feeling sort of fatigue. They are fed up with the war, and the support for Ukraine is actually currently shrinking. So this is the first thing I see right now. They are directing their anger towards the government and saying, why is this our war? And I could go into why this is, and this should be a priority of Germany to have the Ukrainians win this war. But we lose sight of the fact that our government brought us in this situation in the first place, and that the war of Russia in Ukraine is only a contributing factor. So what it should be directed towards the people who are currently opposing nuclear power, but it's currently directed towards the people who still support the sanctions, and I think this is a grave mistake. in order to I'm not expecting the Germans to go out on the street en masse. This has just not been a German thing to do. If it gets way worse, then we might be surprised that they go on the streets, but it's not exactly likely.
Yeah, Felix Hosse. One last question on this front. You talk about sound energy policy in your piece. This would require consistency. We've talked about how this has been going on since the 70s. It's kind of ingrained in German culture at this point. Is the big trap here going to be, well, if we just figure out this thing with Putin, all our problems are going to go away, and that's going to be the false hope because you're still going to have this underlying energy crisis underneath? Is there a little bit of a trap forming here?
100%. 100%. We are in this situation not because of Putin, but because of the irrational fear and, in a way, the decadence of the last governments and of our public. We're here because we lost sight of why it is important to have clean and reliable and cheap energy. And for the politicians, it's always very, very easy to blame Putin on this. But energy prices were the highest in Europe before the war started, and before anyone could think of sanctions and decreases in the amount of gas delivered.
Yeah, Felix Hosse. It's universal. It doesn't matter the country, the language, or the situation. We tend to make our own messes and make sure we blame somebody else so we don't have to deal with it. I'm sure our German friends are going to have that same problem with energy crisis because we're doing that within the States for ourselves right now. Felix Hosse, great information. Really appreciate it. We'll have you back again. Until we see you again on Heard Tell, though, let folks know where they can follow you, what you have going on until they see and hear from you again, my friend.
Awesome. The easiest way to find me is on Twitter, but it's the Free Felix. That's my Twitter handle. But I'd like to direct you to my think tank I recently founded, which is called the Ego Institute. Our website is ego-institute.org, and we are a think tank which gives people perspective on how they can live a freer life by doing easy steps and not rely on the government to make them more free, because history has shown that this usually doesn't work out that way. And we try to give people some guidance on how to live a more free and flourishing life there.
Yeah, we'll link to all that. We'll put all that in. His social media is on the screen if you're watching on the YouTube, and we will put all those in the show notes, including his piece in Sustainability Times on nuclear. Make sure you read the whole thing for yourself. There's some links in there too. You need to make sure you check out, make up your own mind, and we'll continue to talk about this issue because it ain't going away. And like the show's famous for saying, winter's coming, my friend, and this is going to get real, real dicey, I'm afraid. Felix Hosse, appreciate your time, my friend. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, sir.